Hello and welcome along to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. This week we're chatting to Chris Bridges. Chris has been inspired by his own MS diagnosis to write the novel Sick to Death, where we learn about Emma, who is sick but not in the way that you thought. It's such a good tagline. You can hear why he wanted to write fiction where illness is a part of the story, but not a cliched trope half-heartedly thrown in.
So for the end point of a sick person, there's three options usually in fiction. One is that they get better, one is that they die, and the other one would be that they're proven to be a fake. And I'm not saying that I don't like those books. I don't mind them at all. It doesn't bother me. If it's done well, it's fine. If it's done respectfully. The main character is chronically ill. She's not going to get better, like me. She's not going to die. I kind of thought, what if I sort of flipped these tropes?
Also, we talk about why working as a nurse gave Chris the inspiration to write.
It was so much drama and so much character that for me, it was just fascinating because people were so interesting and I was really intrigued by the patients and by the stories and the things that were happening to them and the things around them. And I was that person. I kind of always chose to make life a bit harder for myself. I didn't want to do anything that was quite routine. I always wanted to go and work on the wards where things were quite rough. So I kind of chose quite sort of sharp-end things. But I think all of the experience of being around people for all of those years was really useful for writing.
It's all on the way with Chris Bridges in a brand new Writer's Routine. Yes, welcome along to the show. My name's Sam Simpson. This is Writer's Routine, where we take a look inside an author's working day. We see what, where, and when they do everything. How do they give themselves the best chance of getting words on the page, then a book onto a shelf, and hopefully into your home. And now, a couple of days ago, we had a good chat on my Substack page about plotting versus pantsing. Which side of the fence do you fall down? I interviewed an author for this show a few weeks ago. Podcast will be out in a little while. And they were saying that they really wanted to kind of be a plotter, but when they came down to it, found themselves being a pantser, but then at the end kind of dragged themselves back to plotting again. So there's a really fine balance, and I've done 300 odd episodes of this now. And it's really interesting. Some authors will live and die by the sword that they've kind of aligned themselves to. They've planted their flag in the hill of being a plotter or a pantser, and that's where they are. Some detest the idea of even trying to box it down into something so finite. I wonder where you are. I'd love to know. You can get involved in that chat on the Substack, writersroutine.substack.com, where I'm sending out a newsletter every now and then, just letting you know what's happening on the show. Now, this week, we're chatting to Chris Bridges. Chris has done, quite a bit. Worked as an NHS nurse, a theatre reviewer, a columnist. His winding path to publication took him through Radio 4, the London Writers Award, and now being a published author. And it took his own experience of working in care and now finally having been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis to get that done. The novel is called Sick to Death. It's all about Emma, who can't go to work because of a neurological condition. Her boyfriend won't leave his wife, so she takes matters into her own hands. As I say, Emma is sick, but not in the way that you thought. We talk about why he needed life experience before he could write. Chris does a brilliant job of distilling everything that kind of went wrong with his attempts to write a novel before, and what it finally took to get a story that landed. Also, he talks us through how his MS affects his writing, what he needs to consider every day that maybe you or I don't when we sit down to work. We talk about the crucial midpoint, how he finds it, why it's so important, and what's happening now that Chris is moving house and getting a brand new writing space to play with. If you would like to get a copy of the book Sick to Death, make sure you use the link that is in the episode notes. It will take you to our bookshop.org page. And then we get a little kickback. Some goes to Chris, obviously, and it goes to your local independent bookshop as well. So let's get into it then with Chris Bridges in a brand new Writer's Routine. And we start, as we always do, with what he sees around him in the place where he sits down to write.
I live in Southeast London and we've got a 2-bedroom 1950s flat. So I use the second bedroom. So it's a moderate sized room. And right in front of me, I'm quite archaic. So I don't really like writing on laptops for health reasons because I've got a bit of a dodgy neck. So I write on the kind of PC that you might use in an office in the 90s. So it's a Dell, like an old standard PC, and I have a little box so that the screen is elevated. I used to be a nurse, and I ended up, so back in the 90s when I did my nurse training, we used to lift patients quite a lot, and consequently, I've got a bit of a creaky old neck with a trapped nerve in it just from my troubles. So I have to kind of have this setup. So if I type at a laptop, I end up in loads of neck pain, which is a bit annoying because it confines me to a room. So right in front of me, there's a huge notice board up above me, and it's covered with a collage of postcards of 1950s film stars, writers like Tennessee Williams, Truman Capote. There's loads of poodles on there. I own a poodle and I'm a poodle obsessive. And there's also a lot of pictures of Elizabeth Taylor, which is another obsession. It's quite a varied one. There's Debbie Harry up there, John Waters, the filmmaker. And sometimes when I'm writing, I just like to sit back and kind of have a rest and like let my eyes glaze.
So when you're looking at this, I guess we'll call it a mood board for want of a better word, but these things that inspire you, it's there every day. So it must, to a degree, kind of blend into your regular environment. How often is it inspirational to you when you are struggling a touch?
Yeah, sometimes I look up and there's some quite sort of powerful people there who I really admire. And I will just sometimes sit and contemplate. There's Agatha Christie's there, and I think about like her work ethic and how she managed to churn out 2 novels a year and still maintain quality almost all of the time. Just little things like that kind of make me feel good. We've got Dorothy Parker up there, whose wit I admire. And I do kind of sometimes just focus in, and there's lots of things that are personal to me as well. There's like, I've got a couple of postcards and actual cards that I've put on there that patients gave me over the years as well, that I like the pictures of, and they've chosen really well. There's one that a woman gave me that's a New Yorker cover with loads of books on it and a woman reading, because we got to know each other really well. So those things, they're kind of comforting in a way, I suppose. I suppose that's the word.
So that's the inspiration. Is there anything around you that reminds you what you're there to do? So it would tell us. So plot points, that kind of stuff, run us through it.
So I have a pile of writing books on my desk. There's a lot of notebooks. I'm quite old school. I kind of like to just write copious notes. Often I don't always refer back to them, but I think just getting them out there sometimes helps. So I counted this morning. I was thinking, how many notebooks do I have? Because I'm a bit of a notebook addict, and there's 15 at the moment. Quite a lot. There's a copy on the side of Sick to Death, just sitting there, kind of, which makes me feel good when I look at it. I've got a big notebook at the moment that's got a picture of a poodle on the front, and it says "Haters Gonna Hate." And that one I use to kind of keep almost a Bible of characters. So I'll devote a new notebook to each book that I start writing. And I, part of my job, I was a palliative care nurse kind of for the last 15 years of my career. And I used to see patients who'd got like life-limiting or terminal illnesses or were at the end of their life. And one of the things that we did was we drew family trees, like a traditional scientific genogram. So, because part of my job, it was really useful, because patients who are sick, and I was going to see them on the wards and trying to work out how to help them, everybody has a context. They're not in isolation. So we would try and work out who their family are, who was important, who we needed to get involved. So I actually sort of use that as a crossover, and I find that intensely useful for my characters. So I draw family trees, and I learned the hard way that it's quite important to try and remember their date of birth. Because when I wrote Sick to Death, their ages kept changing. And the copy editor was very kindly picked up that at some point someone was 36, 38 and 34.
I think we're all aging ourselves like that, aren't we, though, when we're in our 30s?
Oh, 100%. You've got a budget. Yeah. So yeah, I draw like a proper kind of family tree, and I'll put who their family members are, and if it's relevant, I'll put their date of birth as well. Um, so I have that, and then I'll also put sort of some little lists of character points as well. I wish I was more of a plotter than kind of someone who just writes freely, but I've tried and failed and don't seem to do that very well. So it progresses. So during the writing of the book, there comes a time. I've got a huge artist sketch pad that I will draw like story arcs on as well. And at times I will pin those up on the notice board as well. It's actually a shared space. I share it with my partner, Paul, who's an artist. So actually, if you looked at the room, you'd kind of maybe think that I can paint, but I can't. I can draw a stick man, but there's all sorts of canvases and tubes of paint. But it's very delineated. I've got my little corner, and I'm sitting next to the radiator in the window and look out onto this kind of leafy southeast London suburb that we live in.
So we know that space is at a premium in London. In your flat, you're writing in the second bedroom, which is also a space where your partner paints. It being a London flat, I imagine there's a few boxes, stuff that can't go anywhere else. That's in there. Occasionally, you'll have people stay over. It's a bedroom, so they need to be there. How kind of makeshift? But you've got this big computer, right, which can't go anywhere. So how makeshift does that space need to be?
So I am one of the tidiest people you could ever meet, and I was always known for it. I used to have to sometimes I'd be talking to patients and I'd want to tidy their beds up while they were sitting. I'm such a clean, sort of tidy freak. So this room is kind of very well organized. We've got a lot of storage in this flat. I don't know whether it's the ethos of a 50s flats that they built really good storage in. So there isn't anything extraneous in here apart from art materials and then my writing corner. And we do very rarely have people to stay, but we've got huge sofas, so we'll kind of put them up in the sitting room. And this room really, we made a conscious decision because for quite a while it was one of those rooms where it doesn't have a function. It was kind of a room where I had a little desk shoved by the doorway, and Paul was using the room to paint in. And it just wasn't working. And then there was also all sorts of other stuff like laundry things and goodness knows what. And we just decided, let's redecorate the room and we're going to make this a thing. We're actually about to leave London, so we're due to move at the end of the month. We're moving down to Hastings. I had to take early retirement at the age of 52 from my job because of illness. So I actually don't have a huge reason to stay in London anymore. So we decided we'd move somewhere else. And we will definitely have more space there. We're moving to a 3-bed house.
Well, let me touch on that, but very quickly, your flat back in the 50s when people who built new homes cared about how we would live, right? I mean, I live in a newer place, a box where there's nothing room for anything. Anyway, let's carp on about that. Just you're moving down to Hastings, so how much thought have you given to how ideal you can make a writing space should you have that luxury?
So we've got 3 bedrooms there. So there's a small box room at the front which looks out onto the street, and I think I quite enjoy that view actually. To be honest, the only bedroom that looks out onto the garden is the actual master bedroom, so that's not a goer. So I think we're going to decide when we get there whether we use that box room for visitors, for Paul's grandchildren, have bunk beds in there, and then use the bigger second bedroom as like an artist studio / my writing space. I think I did. I sort of made a conscious decision to prioritize it because I thought, it's not like, I mean, I could feasibly write on a laptop, but I would find it quite uncomfortable after a short space of time. So I think if I've got to have a space to write, then it should be a proper space, kind of, with my notice board, my desk, my printer, all of that kind of stuff that's there, or my writing books. It's a pleasant space to be in, actually. The only thing that can be unpleasant is that I've got a small dog. I've got a miniature poodle, and she gets very frustrated. So I have to bring her little bed in, and she lies by the computer while I'm typing, waiting impatiently.
Let me just throw your attention back to the computer. We get a little bit technical on this. So I'll be honest with you, in 300 odd authors I've chatted to, not many are writing old school like that. But so what software are you using? Do you have any strong font opinions there, Chris?
Yeah, Times New Roman 12 on Word.
Straight off the bat.
Straight off the bat, that's what I always use. Occasionally Arial, but usually Word, usually Times New Roman. I generally use Word because I'm just so familiar with it. I mean, I grew up in the 1980s and we had computer lessons very rarely. And we had this massive computer and there were 30 children in the class and we all sat around it and looked. So we didn't really learn technology. And then throughout my career as a nurse, technology gradually seeped in. So we went from like pens and paper and all of that right through into the present day when everything was computerized. So kind of all of my technical knowledge is self-taught, kind of, I've never actually had any kind of training, I kind of probably a bit different from slightly younger generations. So I've contemplated, should I try Scrivener? And I hear people talk about these different things they use. And I think, yeah, maybe I should try it. But I think the time I would put into it would probably be quite a lot. So I haven't taken that bold step yet. I think I'm quite analog. I'm a huge Post-it note overuser. If there's ever a Post-it note shortage, it's probably down to me.
I'd like to just touch on your multiple sclerosis diagnosis, right? Because that makes a bulk, a huge chunk of the plot of the new novel, which will come to, and you've touched on it already. I just think for those of us who are able to write free of a disability, how much thought does it play in the way that you write every day? We'll come to the routine in just a second, but just touch on some of those things that you need to think about that perhaps others don't.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I'm really happy to talk about this. I think it's really a really good thing to talk about. So multiple sclerosis is such a strange illness and lots of people have it and there's a huge range of symptoms and severity with it. In my case, I've got quite a lot of damage sort of throughout my brain where there's scar tissue and in my spine. And it's basically just in layman's terms, it's like an electrical wire where the plastic coating gets frayed away, and that's what my immune system's done to my body. So there's a term that I heard the last few years, and it's called dynamic disability, and it's where people are disabled in some way, but actually it fluctuates and they can have good and bad days. So it's quite dynamic, and I think that really sums up how I am. So I think people who don't know me very well would see me and they would think I was perfectly well. I think I'm an absolute expert. I could probably get a master's degree in pretending not to be ill. I'm really good at it. But for me, the multiple sclerosis presents to me, I get a lot of chronic pain with it from nerve pain. And I also get sort of strange symptoms like nausea, patches of numbness. But the thing that affects my writing the most is fatigue and sort of a thing people often refer to as cognitive fog. So I'll get this sort of, I get attacks where I'll get a sensation where the way I can describe it is I feel like all my bones have fallen out, my muscles have stopped working. It's quite random. And I've always been, you can probably tell from my frenetic speech, I'm a type A kind of person, high achiever, had a very, very busy job. And I think for me, I didn't really understand fatigue, even though I worked with lots of people who'd got cancer, who had cancer-related fatigue. I just equated it with like an extreme tiredness, but it's kind of more. I kind of feel like everything's sucked from me. So on those days, writing is almost impossible because it kind of feels like I've drunk half a bottle of Prosecco on a hot afternoon, that kind of sort of, where you feel like there's a slight wall of glass between you and everybody else. It's kind of like...
Do you know they're coming, Chris? As in, so you might wake up one day preparing for a good chunk of writing and you simply can't do it?
Yeah. It's frustrating. I think there's lots of kind of narrative about for people with this kind of fatigue things and lots of different I think one of the commonalities of chronic illness is fatigue, especially with autoimmune illnesses like MS. And I think there's a lot of talk about pacing and spreading out your activity. And for some people that does work, but for me that's never worked because it's so unpredictable. So an example would be I went for coffee with a friend recently and travelled on a bus for an hour each way, which is London, isn't it? That's just normal. Everything's an hour away, isn't it?
A mile down the road, yeah.
Yeah, 1 hour. And then the next day I was just absolutely destroyed. But then other days I can have a day where I'm really quite well and it's almost feels quite cruel, because I'll have a day where I could do a couple of hours of writing, I could do a little bit of cleaning, that kind of thing, or sort of take the dog for a walk. But then, yeah, it just doesn't seem to follow a pattern for me. I tried as a kind of fatigue exercise, to map. So I kept a diary for like a month of every day, so I could try and see if there was a pattern. And after, I think I managed 3 weeks, and then I was like, yeah, the pattern is that there is no pattern.
This is not to do with your writing. It's just a second ago you said that you could have a master's degree in making yourself appear well. I guess the question is, in 2025, when we're perfectly aware of these diagnoses, why do you feel the need to do that? Why can't you be upfront and be like, yeah, I'm feeling pretty crap, like this is a thing that happens to me, I can't do all of this? Why is that something you feel the need to do?
I think there's a couple of things. I suppose often I only show myself to the world on a good day, because they're the only days I can show myself to the world. So on the bad days, I can barely get off the sofa and I'm just kind of lie around and I'll read or watch TV. I think it's probably to do with my personality. I've always been that kind of person who's got a perfectionist streak, always had that type A personality of achievement. So I think for me, yeah, I think theoretically I don't feel any shame about sort of having an illness, and I talk very openly about it. But I think there's still a part of me that kind of wants to present myself in a good way. I think I think that there's a personality state there. I think I'm the person who would be saying 100% people should know about disability, they should understand it, but then equally, I kind of want to look well and good, which I think is an understandable trait as well.
Yeah, I completely understand that notion of not wanting to let it like define you, and it sounds so trite, doesn't it? And this is not to do down anyone else's diagnosis, but you've said a couple of times how you pride yourself on your ability to do well, right? A type A, perceived to be a high achiever. So how I guess frustrating was it when you had the diagnosis confirmed, and also how much of you wanted, how tricky was the balance of, I'm not going to let this define me, I'm going to do what I want, but also simply some days you can't?
They first told me I might have MS when I was about 30 in 2001. And it's a long and complicated story. But I had a scan and it came back negative. I'd had a lot of MS type symptoms. And then I entered a kind of revolving door pattern where every few years I'd get like a relapse and I'd get MS type symptoms, like these areas of numbness and fatigue and things like that. And I actually went blind in one eye at one point as well. It was kind of all these things. And I knew that something was wrong with me, but no one could seem to find out what it was, because they kept doing MRI scans of my head and not finding anything. And then eventually I had kind of a bit of a mega attack at the beginning of 2020, where I had a huge area of numbness that went all down my back and leg. And that's when they diagnosed me. So it's not uncommon for people to have a slow route to diagnosis. No one knows why it didn't show up on the scans, but it could be to do with timings, or just that the damage was quite subtle at that time. And there would have been no different treatment had I been diagnosed earlier. I think the only difference would have been in terms of validation. So when I got the actual diagnosis, it actually felt quite validating, because I just thought, so like I'm not mad or hysterical. There is actually something wrong with me. And actually now I can get some treatment, because I'm actually on a treatment to try and prevent further damage. So, all of those sort of factors kicked in. But saying that, I'd kind of always wanted to write a novel. I'm a book obsessive. When I was at school, I bought a typewriter with my pocket money when I was 12. I went to W.H. Smith's and bought this red typewriter with the intention of writing a novel at the age of 12. And then decided I was going to go to university and I was going to study English literature, and that I wanted to be a journalist, all of those things. And then kind of life got in the way, and I was a bit of a troubled teenager for various reasons, and ended up flunking my A-levels and kind of ended up falling into nursing. And this kind of desire to write kind of faded away, and I just sort of carried on being a very avid reader. I've always read 2 or 3 novels a week, if not more. If I'm off work, which or I'm ill, then I read 4 or 5 novels in a week. So I kind of thought, yeah, I would quite like to be a writer one day. And then so I did a writing course probably about 15 years ago at a local. I'm actually from Derby originally, so I did one at an arts centre there, and it went really well, and I actually really enjoyed it. People seemed to like what I wrote, so I thought, oh my god, I'm going to be a writer. So I entered a regional writing competition, and I won with a piece of flash fiction, and I had to go to a stately home in Derbyshire to an awards ceremony. I was like, oh my god, I've made it! I can actually be a writer. So then I started submitting short stories to magazines and all sorts of places, and I got rejected and rejected and rejected. And I thought, okay, I can't cope with this. This is not for me. I cannot do this. And so I just gave it up. I didn't cope well. I wish I could sort of go back and tell 30-something-year-old me to kind of just plow through, but it's the way life goes. So I kind of actually then I fell into theatre reviewing and writing a column. So there was a new website that was launched, and it was a website aimed primarily at gay men, but it was a kind of LGBTQ website. And I wrote a weekly column for them, wrote theatre reviews, and then that branched out and I ended up writing theatre reviews for various websites. Obviously, then we moved to London as well, so there was a huge opportunity for it. So I felt like my writing stuff. There will be a point to the story, by the way. I felt like my writing stuff all kind of was pushed into that, and I actually felt fine because I think the fact I was writing made me feel better. So then 2020, I was diagnosed with the MS, and I was reeling. Although I was relieved, there was a part of me that was actually reeling, and I think I overanalyzed things because of the job I had and my personality. And I thought, okay, I need a period of adjustment, a period of bereavement. I've got to feel sad about this. This can't be just pushed under the carpet because that's not healthy. So I was kind of going through all of that. And then COVID hit. So obviously I was a nurse. So my job changed quite a lot and was quite different and quite scary. And at that moment, there was a Radio 4 shout out, and they wanted people to write articles for the Today programme about their experience of COVID. And I thought, well, my experience of COVID is really weird and it's quite unique because I was essentially looking after the people who were actually dying of COVID. And I thought I could write something here that's actually realistic, but also reassuring about the fact that the people we were looking after, that we were doing our best for them, and that there was, things were as good as they could be. So I wrote a piece, not expecting them to even answer back. And within a day, they answered back and said, could you record it for tonight's radio show? And it just sort of set this thing off in me. And I think it was like, I would say it's a catalyst of different things. It was my long-term desire to write, the fact that I'd had something that to me felt like a massive validation. I was like, oh my God, Radio 4, that's really something. And then I think the fact that I'd been diagnosed with MS as well also pushed in and made me think, if I don't write this novel now, I don't know what my future holds. Because I sometimes feel like, I don't know if you know the thing of the sword of Damocles, where the servant asks if he can sit on the king's throne, and the king says you can sit there, but then he suspends a massive sword on a horsehair over his head to kind of demonstrate this pressure of being the king. So I sometimes feel like I've got this thing that may or may not hit me. It could be that my life just carries on as it is, or who knows, but I have this uncertainty. So I think all of those factors came together and I thought, that's it, I'm going to write a novel. So a lot of writers started writing during COVID because they were off work and they were furloughed. So they were sat at home and thought, okay, I've got this time, going to use it. I was the opposite. So I was like working all day, coming home, and then I'd write for an hour or 2 hours at night. And then, that carried on. So it's quite a reverse of the usual narrative. I think nursing was an amazing experience to learn to write because for me, when I first started my nurse training in the early 90s, I was really unsure whether this was the right job for me. I didn't know. I was a little bit squeamish. I was anxious. I thought, this is so alien and strange. And I kind of decided to do it on a strange whim that was basically, embarrassingly, to do with the fact that you got paid during your training rather than having to live on a student grant. And I thought, I'm going to try this. But it was so much drama and so much character that for me it was just fascinating because people were so interesting, and I was really intrigued by the patients and by the stories and the things that were happening to them and the things around them. And I was that person. I kind of always chose to make life a bit harder for myself. I didn't want to do anything that was quite routine. I always wanted to go and work on the wards where things were quite rough. So I ended up managing a liver unit, which was we had quite a diverse population, lots of people with addiction issues, homelessness. And then I'd worked as a chemotherapy nurse for a couple of years as well on a ward. And then I ended up being a palliative care nurse. So I kind of chose quite sort of sharp end things. But I think all of the experience of being around people for all of those years, it was really useful for writing. I think my own personal experience of illness, 100%, was very useful in this book. When I actually decided to write, I decided I'm going to write a book about nurses. So that was the first book I wrote, was a book about nurses. And so I really didn't understand what I was doing. I kind of think I had an innate understanding of how books work because of my voracious reading. So I wrote this book and then sent it off to agents in batches, and I ended up getting up to 50 something, I think, and got nothing at all apart from I got 2 really positive pieces of feedback that said, we really like the way that you write, we think you're a good writer, but this is not a good story. So I was like, okay, that's really interesting. And I was like, this is a bit like the Radio 4 validation. So an actual literary agent has said that I can write. So maybe I've just written the wrong story. So I thought to myself, what if I told a story I understand that's quite unique and quite different? So I kind of thought to myself, what if I extrapolate my life? Because at that time I was still managing to go to work, although it was difficult and I was having a lot of time off sick and ended up retiring. But I was in the fortunate position that I paid into an NHS pension for decades because we were put into it automatically when we started our training. So I'd got that to fall back on. I've got a partner who's very caring. I've got a flat, I've got all of those things. So I thought, what if I extrapolated kind of what life might be like if I didn't have those things? And I thought, what would it be like to have a neurological illness, but not have people who care about you, not be believed by anybody, not have a bedroom even? You're in an overcrowded London house, you having to sleep on the sofa, those kind of things. And I kind of put all those things together and it just really got me thinking. And I thought, if all those things happened, how desperate would you be? And then the other thing that inspired me was that fiction for me has always been a huge comfort. So when I was growing up, I kind of realized that there was something different about me and knew that I was gay. But in the 80s, it really wasn't very talked about and there were no role models on television. It wasn't something that was there. Ironically, there were a few other boys in my class who actually turned out to be gay later on, and we didn't even talk about it, even though we were friends and we kind of all secretly knew we were gay. So for me, the answer to that was books. So the local library, the Central Library in Derby, had a section devoted to like sociology and gender, and they had loads of books about gay men in there, or books by gay men. So I looked to those for the answer. And in later life, the stress of work, and I kind of had a point where I buckled and had a kind of burnout. And for me, one of the things that got me through that was books. And I don't mean like factual books. It was always fiction because I don't really enjoy reading nonfiction. So I'd see parallels in fiction with my own life. And I started to think to myself, what books can I find for myself that are fiction, that are readable, that talk about illness where it's not seen as a trope? And I think there are some, but it's just sparse. I kind of thought, how are sick people portrayed in books, and why? And I kind of started to think about it and analyse it. And I thought, there's a good reason. And one of them is that someone like me, I don't have a story arc. So if I'm in a book, say someone wrote a book and I was the main character as a protagonist, I don't have a story arc, because if you want to make my illness the story, which people often do, then my illness stays the same. I'm not going to change very much. It's unlikely. So hopefully I'll stay as well as I am now. I'll have periods where my illness goes up and down. But the story arc that illness often takes in books is that the character is often weak, very passive, very sweet and sickly. Or the other extreme, you've got the kind of embittered, bedbound person who's in a 1930s crime thriller and ends up being murdered, that kind of thing. So the story arc would be that you'd follow that traditional narrative arc, and then there'd be kind of a midpoint, and then the character has to have an end point. And so for the end point of a sick person, there's three options usually in fiction. One is that they get better, one is that they die, and the other one would be that they're proven to be a fake. And I'm not saying that I don't like those books. I don't mind them at all. It doesn't bother me. If it's done well, it's fine. If it's done respectfully, I'm absolutely fine with the character getting better, dying, or being proven to be a fake, if that suits the narrative and it's handled well. But I thought, what about me writing a book where the main character is chronically ill? She's not going to get better. Like me, she's not going to die. I mean, for multiple sclerosis, the life expectancy is pretty similar to someone without multiple sclerosis. It's a matter of a few years. I've not put a number on it because they're always changing their mind. But with modern treatments, so I kind of thought, what if I sort of flipped these tropes? And I'd say I probably read about 75% like book club or literary fiction, whatever silly terms you want to give it. But 25% of my reading is crime fiction. And that's kind of what I grew up on. I was a big fan of Ruth Rendell, P.D. James, and I love suspense thrillers where there's a huge psychological element. So I thought a sick person in a crime thriller as a protagonist, and I thought to myself, could I kill somebody? I have no desire to kill anybody. I will never kill anybody. I'm sure of it. But I think if I wanted to, physically, I probably could. On a good day, I'd probably need to lie down for 3 days afterwards, and it would need a bit of planning. But so I thought, well, do you know what? I'm going to write a book about someone who has got a murderous rage and she's chronically ill, and it's here.
So, so much questions come up from that. So it's all led to this point where you've got this idea, and you want to write it in a very crime thriller, psychological thriller kind of style. You're not a heavy plotter, which, although you've tried, you mentioned that earlier on. So what are you doing before you start writing? You've given this enough goes now to be told that you can write, but just maybe you need another plot, another avenue to write down. So how much are you thinking about everything that comes afterwards before you start typing that first sentence?
So an amazing thing happened after I wrote that first book, which didn't fly. I saw an advert for a thing called the London Writers' Award, which is something that the Republican Party in America might not like. It was a diversity initiative. So the London Writers' Award is an amazing programme that's run for writers in London who are from underrepresented groups, such as people from LGBTQ backgrounds or people with diverse ethnicity, working class people, people with disabilities. And they were looking for people who had started writing a novel. So I sent in the required word count along with a synopsis, and I got chosen to be on the award. So it was an amazing program, like a 9-month program where we did like lectures, most of it online because it was just post-COVID. We had different writers come to talk to us, and so I did learn a lot on that about story arcs and plots and those kind of things that I hadn't really understood as formally as I probably should. So it was such a useful program. So I kind of say for me, I know how the story is going to start. I know what the inciting incident is going to be. I know I'm a little bit fixated on midpoints. I think midpoints are so important in a crime novel. I got so fixated to the point that there was a period where every time I watched television, I'd be looking for the midpoint. So we'd watch a drama on television and I'd even tell my partner, I'd go, oh, this is the midpoint. And you can see, it's so clear so often. It's like it was a revelation to me. And I was like, why did I not understand this midpoint?
So define that for us, Chris. So is the midpoint for you when everything's going wrong? Is it when the story is suddenly switching and completely changing avenue?
Yeah, in the case of Sick to Death, there's a big midpoint where things change and perceptions change. It's hard for me to talk about it without giving spoilers. But for me, yeah, midpoint is kind of a crux of action when everything comes to a head. If you drew the story as like a graph, that would be the peak of the axis, I think is the right word, isn't it? So yeah, that's the kind of midpoint for me. And you often see it in a drama. There'll be something like a character has an inciting incident and there's something that they're aiming towards. They want something really badly or they've got to do something. And then it sort of all suddenly comes to a head and then you're on the kind of resolution pathway from there on. So I think for me, I'd kind of look at the inciting incident. For me, it's very important for me to know what a character actually wants and what's their desire. And another thing, which I'll go on to in a minute. And then I kind of have an idea of what the midpoint's going to be. I know pretty much what the ending's going to be. And there's probably sort of a few beats that I've got in my head, and I kind of have them there. There's a book that I particularly am fond of, which is called The Science of Storytelling by Will Storr, which I'm sure you've heard of. And he's also done lots of podcasts where he talks about it. And he talks about how often characters, if you boil it down, they have a fundamental belief that is quite flawed. So they'll have this sort of thought about themselves, and he gives you this kind of way of drilling it down. And I do that for the characters as well, for the protagonists, and try and work out what is this flaw in their thinking that's making them behave like they are, which I find a really interesting way to do it. So I say that I'm not a planner, but I kind of plan as well. Years and years ago, I did a course with the Royal College of Nursing. It was when I was a ward manager, and I was trying to learn to be a better manager. And I'm not into those kind of things. They're not me. And on this course, they made us do this, like, you know, when you do these ridiculous questionnaires where there's about 150 questions, and then they came up with this thing, and apparently I felt like very seen, because they basically said that I'm the kind of person who jumps into doing something and just does it and then worries about it afterwards, which is exactly what I do. I do it with an element of planning, but then I kind of just go, oh, I'll just do it. And then I kind of afterwards, I think, oh, okay, maybe that wasn't right. And I actually thought about this, and I do this in my writing. So I would just sit down at my old-fashioned clockwork computer, and I would type a chapter, maybe 2,000 words if I've got the energy that day, and then I'll just put that to bed. And then during the rest of the day, I start to think about what I've written and mull it over a bit. And I think, oh, actually, at this point in time, she would have said this. Or wouldn't it be interesting if this happened, or she saw this, or kind of, oh, actually, in terms of atmosphere, I could add in this. And sometimes if I'm having a really good day, I'll take the dog for a walk to the local park. And I'll be thinking all the time, and I'll suddenly stop dead in the middle of the street and get my phone out and make some notes. Or the other thing I'll do is we'll be sitting watching TV, or I'll be reading, and I'll suddenly put my book down and I'll pick up a Post-it note. So I come back to the PC the next day, provided I'm feeling well enough, and I'll go through the kind of couple of thousand words I've written the day before, and I'll tweak, and which doesn't take me a huge amount of time, and then I'll do the same again and repeat. So it's a really strange method of writing, I think, but I think it reflects me, kind of the way I am.
Back with more from Chris in just a sec. I'm popping by very quickly to remind you that if you're enjoying the show, you can always help us out a little bit. You can support us in a couple of ways. One of them is by making a monthly contribution over on Patreon. By pledging there, you can support us. It helps keep us going and keep bringing you these chats with the best authors around as often as we can. You get merch there. There is bonus content. There is even a way for your book to sponsor this show. If you've written something, if it deserves more chat around it, let me do the plugging for you. To make that happen, you can look into becoming a backer over at patreon.com/writersroutine. Now, I know that maybe a rolling monthly pledge isn't always the best way for maybe you to support the show. Well, you can do that as a one-off if you'd like over on our Ko-Fi page, ko-fi.com/writersroutine. I think it's Ko-Fi. Because the game with it is, well, you can buy me a coffee, but it's spelled Ko-Fi, which is a play on lo-fi, so it's kind of a double pun, and neither brilliantly work. Anyway, don't let that rambling distract you from the fact that you can support me there if you'd like as well. Just a few dollars, send it over through Ko-Fi, and it comes straight to the podcast. One and done. I'd love to see you help us out there. ko-fi.com/writersroutine. Let's get back to it with Chris Bridges. Let's get back to it then with Chris Bridges chatting about his new novel, Sick to Death. We talk about how much he thought about the genre that he was in. Also, we will hear about the writing day, by the way. We'll get into the routine. And he's said already that he's written the novel to tell a story about someone with a disability that is simply not using that disability as a trope to help other characters kind of get on with it. So that's why he's done it. He's doing it through Emma's eyes. So how did he get to know her side of the story?
I've spent my whole life surrounded by women, and it's always been for me that I don't always relate to men as well. Obviously, I have a partner who's male who I relate to perfectly well, but I just kind of feel like all of my friends at school were women, almost. And then I went into nursing, which is a very female-dominated profession, and so that was one reason why I felt like I wanted to write in a female voice. I think sometimes people look on dubiously if a man tries to write in a woman's voice, but hopefully I've captured this, but that's not for me to judge. But the other thing was, so women are much more disenfranchised in terms of illness. So it's well documented through research that women are more likely to be seen, both historically and in the present day, as being sort of, in inverted commas, hysterical. And that's kind of a position that I wanted to put the main character in this book in. The illness that she has isn't initially specified, but she does have the kind of illness that those labels are attached to, and it's quite a difficult thing. So one of the main reasons I chose for a younger female character was that would be the demographic of people who would be seen as being hysterical, be labelled. I also wanted her to be a mother who couldn't look after a child very well. And I felt that I wanted her to enter into a romance that was part of the plot, and it kind of worked better that way as well. So that was my rationale for the choices.
How much did you need to play around with the truth of a condition? Because again, the Emma's has a neurological condition which is not defined at the start, as you've mentioned. And this might be a very, very naive and trite thing for me to say, but perhaps one of the reasons why we don't see many disabled protagonists is because I don't know, can it slightly limit what they can do? You know, that I don't know. Are they able to go on like very thrilling chases or whatever? Do we need to spend a lot of time in their mind with their thought processes as they're trying to figure things out? So how much did you need to play around with the truth of what Emma is actually, what you want Emma to do and what she's actually able to do to make a thrilling narrative?
Yeah, so I kind of stuck to my own truth, I think, in a way. And I think the first half of the book is what I would describe as a slow burn. And I have done the thing that authors aren't supposed to do and read some of my early reader reviews and stuff on NetGalley. And people mostly seem to love the slow burn, but you do get the occasional person who sees slow burn as an insult, kind of like, this is a slow burn, it's a bad thing. For me, I quite like a slow burn psychological thriller where it builds up. And I think that she's got an interiority because of what's happening to her. She's a character who is living in social deprivation. They live in the last remaining council house on the street in quite a wealthy area. So I decided to put her in. So I live in an ex-local authority flat that was built in a hole that was where a doodlebug dropped during the war. And it knocked out several Edwardian villas and kind of left this hole. And then in the 1950s, they rebuilt to house people and built these 4 blocks of council flats in the middle of this street of Edwardian villas. So I thought, what about putting Emma in local authority housing? What about making it so she hasn't got anywhere to sleep? All of those things. So, but I thought, what can I do with her ability that kind of reflects my reality? So I decided to make her ability unreliable so that she has periods where she does need to go and lie down. But I mean, they don't necessarily need to be written about. So, you know, I would just bypass those by stating the fact that this is happening. And she definitely does rise to the occasion. You know, she kind of manages. I think adrenaline, rage, those kind of things push her through. But it is a balance, because I was very conscious. I was like, is this book a Trojan horse? I'm trying to trick people into reading a book by it's a thriller. Actually, it's just me complaining about being ill quite a lot.
Well, I wanted to ask you that because talking about that balance. So this is a story where, not a Trojan horse, and it's not like a message story where you're just getting out all these things that, women are underrepresented, those with disabilities are underrepresented, but you need to make it thrilling. How did you strike that balance?
So I decided that I would take the standard trope of a psychological thriller because I love them. I liked what they would call domestic noir, those kind of things. It's usually a wealthy middle class woman lives in this magnificent house and she's got this new neighbor. She's having an affair. Somebody's trying to kill her, but she doesn't know who it is. And who's the bad person? Who's the good one? Then there's a twist. All of that. I lap those books up as long as they're fairly well written and quite elevated. I enjoy them a lot. And I thought, well, why not use that framework and just write? But instead of that wealthy middle-aged woman, which, I mean, it's not always, that's just I'm being a bit facetious, but why not make it so it's this young disabled woman? Why can't she do those things? And why can't that be her story? So I decided to use that framework. So Emma's story is actually that she is in this very uncomfortable position in life where she hasn't got much empathy around her. She's financially struggling. She hasn't got any prospects. And she meets a man who has a very beguiling proposition for her. And he tries to suck her into a plot to kill his wife. So I thought, she needs a story. It can't just be a book where it's somebody who's disabled and just kind of falling asleep quite a lot. But yeah, so I kind of fitted her into the framework of a psychological thriller story.
Now, just, I guess, a brief flyover. You've read a lot of these types of books. Just run us through how much thought you gave to the standard tropes that are in them in terms of pacing, in terms of chapter length, sentence length, very simply what word you're choosing to come next. How much thought did you give to all of those little things?
I think something that people have said is that they think that I have a handle on, it's quite embarrassing to say, isn't it, to praise yourself, but that I have a handle on rhythm in writing. I really enjoy quite staccato sentences sort of mixed in with much longer sentences. And I almost see it as like making a tune. It's kind of like rhythmic and poetic when you write. And I like the kind of fierceness of quite staccato sentences as well. I think because the main character in this, she's got quite a lot of rage as well. She's quite an angry person, and justifiably. That's my view anyway, but I'm quite fond of her. So I kind of quite enjoy that sort of style of writing. I love this elements of taking something that's every day and making it sinister, like a London pavement. If I think about that, there's a scene in it where she's walking down the street at night, and the roots of trees are ripping up the concrete, aren't they? Because the force of nature is pushing through. You've got those kind of spiky London plane trees in the winter that look quite barbaric, and there's something quite primeval about them. So all of those things. So I quite like to find an element of the sinister in the everyday. I think it's there all around us. And one of Emma's things is that she's also a very keen bird watcher, because her father was a bird watcher. But Emma's got a bit of a dark mind, so she quite likes the kind of dark side of birds. So there's lots of bird talk in there, I'm afraid.
Oh, it's always good for bird talk. Well, listen, I've discovered that we're coming towards the end and we've not done the point of the show. So, Chris, it's called Writer's Routine. Just take us through a day in the life when you're comfortable to kind of get writing. How does the whole thing look?
So I have quite an odd sleep pattern, which I blame on years of shift work, but I'm also probably a bit Mediterranean in my sleeping. So I tend to wake up about 5:30 in the morning. I'll get up and I'll sit and I'll just check social media, sit and read for a bit, drink a couple of cups of coffee, get myself fired up. And then if it's a good day and I'll prioritize writing above anything else. There are other days when I think, actually, I need to leave the house, because if I've got this limited amount of energy, so I will take the dog out. But on a good day, so I will come in and I will sit and I will write at the computer for a couple of hours, and I will aim to write sort of 1,500 words. I have to be a bit careful with myself because I'm one of those people. I set myself a goal, and because I've got this kind of perfectionism and this quite driven personality, I'm actually lying to myself. So I'll say, yeah, today, Chris, you're allowed to write 1,000 words. But what I actually mean is I want you to write 2,000. So I have to kind of do a bit of self-talk and kind of work out what I'm really doing. So usually I'll write for about 40 minutes or so. And then I'll get up and I'll walk around the flat. Just sometimes just tidy things up, put the dog's toys away where she's been throwing them around 'cause she's bored, so I'm ignoring her. Just little things like that. And then I'll come back and carry on, and I'll keep writing in blocks. And then usually I then have lunch, and I have this it always feels like I've got quite a lazy lifestyle, because I think it's quite hard to shake off the shackles of having had a very frenetic career. But I'll often read, rest, sometimes have a nap for a couple of hours, depending on how things are. If it's a bad day with the MS, but I really still want to write, I sometimes can force myself, but there's not always wisdom in doing that, because it can kind of have a bit of a payoff. So it feels like it just takes double the energy to do it, because I've got this fatigue. And like, imagine that you're a little bit drunk and you're trying to pretend that you're not drunk and kind of talk. It's kind of that. You've got to do that. Another irony of MS sometimes is that when I'm really tired, I get word finding problems, which was embarrassing when I was working, because I'd often be talking to patients in very difficult situations that were quite tense, and I'd suddenly not know what the word was. But there was a bit of a payoff to the fact of all my reading, because I'm quite, as you've heard, I'm quite verbose, and I'm like to think I'm quite articulate. So I used to just think of a different word. So sometimes that kicks in when I'm trying to write as well, if I'm having a bad day, and that, it's a bit of a death knell for the writing when you can't actually think of the words. Although thesauruses do exist. So yeah, it's quite hard to have a routine, but I suppose I've got a routine within chaos, I would call it. I'm much better when I'm editing, because I think there's something about having I think I'm maybe a bit more stick than carrot, and the fact that there's a deadline. So when the publishers send through edits, they'll say, can you try and get this done in 4 weeks? So they've been amazingly flexible with me, and they're really understanding about my health. And I find that then there is part of me that somehow manages to push through a little bit more, just because I've got that there.
You said earlier on, when you were talking about your diagnosis and how that spurred you on to write a book, I guess, what does future planning look like for you? You're clearly someone that's driven to want to do what they can and to the best of their abilities. Is there and you've got this book out, is there a thought to, well, I'd like to get so many books done, but in 5-10 years? Is that an unhealthy thing to do, though? Because it's like, well, we'll see what happens.
So I'm kind of trialing what happens. So I got signed up with Avon, who are a HarperCollins publishing house, who do commercial fiction. Their books go straight to paperback, which is great. I think they've got a real good, strong eye on what is commercial. So I signed for a 2-book deal. So it was like 2 books in 2 years. So I have actually managed that just about, or we're getting there at the moment. So I'm in the process of editing book 2. So I think this is a trial for me. So I'm kind of going to see how things go and whether that is manageable, and then see where we go from there. And I suppose the question will be with the sales as well, whether, if Sick to Death does really well, then they'll probably want another book from me and might want to sign me up for more. And I would be happy to. At the moment, I feel like that is quite manageable. But yeah, I think it all depends. It's a complicated thing, because I hadn't quite thought how much of a split your headspace would have to be in when you write. So I've written Sick to Death, it's done, put to bed, all the edits done, and then I instantly started writing book 2, which was the typical difficult second novel and was a lot of trauma. And then intruding upon all of that was having to stop, do more edits on Sick to Death, then come back to the second novel, and it all became very sort of. So it's been a real learning experience to try and work out what my headspace is. Where am I? Am I in Sick to Death? Am I in book 2? And then I finished book 2, sent it in, and I started writing book 3 and made plans. And then it all kicked in. So like doing things like this, writing articles, doing promo work, trying to have an online presence for Sick to Death, then editing book 2, and I've also got this really exciting idea for book 3 that I'm dying to write, and there's a part of me that would just like to ditch the rest of it and be like, oh my god, this book's going to be so good. which that happens until you actually start trying to write it.
And that is it for this week's Writer's Routine. Thank you so much to Chris Bridges for coming on the show. The new novel is Sick to Death. You can get a copy right now using our bookshop.org page in the links wherever you're listening. Also there, you'll find links to support us on Patreon and Ko-Fi. You can get in touch with the show as well at writersroutine.com. Also, I'd love to hear from you if you fancy leaving us a review on Apple, or if you fancy dropping us a follow on X or Instagram. It's all there wherever you're listening. And I will see you next week with a brand new guest sharing their writer's routine. Until then, thanks for listening.